Let's bring in John Horack. He's in Columbus, Ohio. He is Ohio State University's Neil Armstrong Chair in Aerospace Policy. I already talked about one astronaut from Ohio, John Glenn. Neil Armstrong, obviously, another one. I can remember a while back seeing this documentary, Shadow of the Moon, talking about the 12 astronauts who walked on the moon with my son. And I thought about, when I was a little kid, how great this was, and it never has happened in his lifetime. Now we're talking about possibly going to the moon with Chinese astronauts. Talk to me about how important this day is in terms of taking that step.
So I think it's very important in terms of taking that step. One of the things that you have to master in order to get to the moon is the ability to get off the Earth. And so this opportunity now, the Long March 2F is now 12 for 12. We see now the Chinese demonstrating a reliable capability to take people into low Earth orbit. And with that capability, they will learn to work in space, to be space citizens as opposed to space visitors. And we've had a lot of that experience here in the United States with our international partners on the space station. And the Chinese are building that capability in the same direction.
And John, I want to get your thoughts about what John Zarella was just talking about. We saw President Obama basically canceling the Return to Moon program after he took office. How you have these countries all going in different directions. What do you make of that?
So I think, but right before I came on, I think it was John's comment about the three nations going in three directions. And certainly that's a possibility. But I also think that if we look at the long arc of history, I do think it tends to bend towards collaboration. And at the early days of the space station, I think it would be fair to say that perhaps the Chinese didn't have the capability to bring to the table, which they certainly do now. And we're in a situation where it's going to be much better, I think much easier, and certainly more cost effective if we move out into space beyond low Earth orbit in some way that we're integrated as opposed to differentiated. And so I think that we also have a strong opportunity in time to see nations collaborating together and going to the moon together and then on to Mars.
Well, we'll talk a little bit more about cooperation, collaboration, because I think that's it's one of those tricky things. And Sean, you and I have talked about this in the past as well. But let's talk a little bit about what private enterprise does in terms of driving this forward, because there's been so much talk about Elon Musk going to Mars, and Boeing recently saying, oh, we're going to beat them there. Talk to me about private industry, and I'll start with you, Sean.
Well, they've had real ups and real downs. I think that's the best way to sum it up right now. There have been some horrific failures in trying to move forward. But one thing I think that really jumps out as well is the fact that there is this law that prohibits the United States from working with China. So we heard John talk about, John Horack and Ohio State talk about moving forward and having this working together type spirit. And privately, I think you can get Charlie Bolden, the head of NASA, to say, we really need to do this. But publicly, you have lawmakers, whether it's xenophobia or whatever it is, saying you can't work with China. And a lot of people think that is incredibly short-sighted, because right now China has the welcome mat out. If other nations want to work with them as they develop their space station, and the Shenzhou rocket has worked amazingly well since 2003, we did have a chance to sit down and talk with Charlie Bolden, actually it was a couple of years ago, about moving forward. And here's what he had to say in terms of working with China.
I will tell people the U.S. and China work together today in the space program, and we do that with the blessing is not a good word. We do that with the full knowledge and I hope confidence of the U.S. Congress, because we have two areas in which we are working diligently with the Chinese, and they are both in the area of earth science. One is in the area of geodetics, trying to understand earthquakes, their origin. You can't, being able to predict them would be great. And the second area is in glacial characterization in the Himalayan mountain region, where we are working collaboratively with China and 8 other Himalayan nations. So we continue to work collaboratively in partnership with China in the area of Earth observations and Earth science.
It all seems rather silly to me, because when you look at the cooperation with Russia, where the United States has this, but without Russia, they can't get astronauts up to the International Space Station. It doesn't seem to make sense to me.
Well, I mean, yeah, and I think, John Horack makes a really good point about the long arc of history and eventually everybody having to get together in order to make it work, because certainly the cost is nobody can really give you a good estimate even on how much it would cost to do human flights to Mars. I mean, that's how at one point it was like $500 billion or something. But the only way you're ever going to accomplish those kinds of things is cooperating with multiple nations getting together to do it. You build this piece, we'll build that piece. You know, we'll get together, we'll build the lift, the launcher, you build the habitat. You've got to have that in order for these things to be successful.
I think one thing, too, that you can't lose sight of in this, and I'd love to hear what John Horack has to say about this, is the pride factor. I mean, it really had people in the U.S. puffing their chest out in the 1960s as they moved to go to the moon. China has done so well with its space mission over the last 13 years, and I think so many people are going to know the name Jing Haipeng and Chen Dong once they return. I mean, I think you could say that Jing could be a national hero when all this is done.
Oh, absolutely. And he's saying he's been watching the guy in the Olympics and saying, I want to do what he did. But I do want to get your thoughts on that, John.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. All spaceflight is human, even if you're sending a robot. It's all about the people, and we all share great pride personally in terms of our own contributions when we're fortunate to make them, in terms of our countrymen and women, and in fact in terms of human beings going into space. I mean, I'm very excited to see human beings flying into space. The other comment I hope to be able to make here about the collaboration is I find that rarely is there any challenge between individuals who want to cooperate, scientist to scientist, engineer to engineer. At the human level, because as I said, it's all human spaceflight, I think you see on the facts on the ground, so to speak, that humans want to collaborate. We want to work with each other. We need to find the right structures in which we can do that so that everyone's needs and concerns are met. And so I think with this kind of movement forward, and I think the benefit of collaboration with the Russians is something else, because when the Soviet Union was having challenges, it was the United States that helped to reach out, bring the Soviets and the Russians into the space station program to enable the great contributions that they have made. And now perhaps we're leaning on each other as collaborations do, and we will see again in the future when the United States can again send astronauts into space, perhaps through commercial companies. We will then be able to bring other capabilities to the collaboration table to move everyone forward.
Well, and getting back to Neil Armstrong and a lot of these astronauts who did go to the moon, they said they didn't go as Americans. They went as humans. And that's exactly, that's how the world looked at it too. It was not just the United States, but the world going to another planet. And that's really clearly getting back to your point. When they come together, a lot of these divisions can go away too.